So if you look on our Algebra 1 Teams page, under the current week's channel, right, which is week 8 now, you'll see that for Tuesday our work is page 2 of week 8 problems, questions 1 through 4. We have one Khan Academy practice and a video link as well. So, right, remember that yesterday we were working on page 1, so now we're on to a new page, a new topic, which is going to be on page 2. So let's preview this topic, right? Let's go up until we see page 2 examples. Right, we could click here, or we could click here. And we see that we are working on a topic called using the quadratic formula. Right, so the quadratic formula is a formula that you could use to solve quadratic equations, right? And for the past month or so, we've been solving quadratic equations, right? Anything that looks like that has the biggest exponent on x is a 2, right? So if you have like anything with an x squared and any equation with an x squared, for the most part, is a quadratic equation. Right, most of the times we're used to seeing them with an x squared, an x, and a constant, right? Like here, 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. But sometimes they could only have 2 terms or 1 term, and those are still quadratic equations, right? So before we've been solving these equations by factoring, right? We made the diamond, we made the generic rectangle, we figured out the length and the width, we rewrote the sum, right? This is a sum, and we rewrote it as a product, and then we use the zero product property because it equals 0 to get the 2 answers. So now we're going to do it a different way, and the reason why is because factoring does not always work. Right? Factoring can sometimes a problem cannot be factored. So they wanted to figure out somewhere down the line, some people wanted to figure out a formula that you could use every time to solve the quadratic equation, which is why the quadratic formula was developed. So just like factoring, it has to equal 0. Right? In order to use the equation, it has to equal 0. So we have, and the equation is x equals, right? It says negative b, but it's good to think about this as the opposite of b. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then some things to remember about the quadratic equation is, okay, and you might be confused about what is a, b, and c. Well, as long as your equation goes x squared, x, constant, right, as long as that's the case, then your a term is just going to be the number before the x squared. So our a is 2 here, for example 1. Right? Our b is before the x. So our b term is going to be, right, 5. But remember, it's negative 5. So our b is negative 5. Our c is a constant, right? The number at the end, negative 3. So we have a, b, and c. As long as it goes x squared, x, constant, it'll just be the first number, second number, third number. So some things that you got to remember about the quadratic equation is, first off, if, right, like in this example, if there's no number before the x squared, it's going to be 1, right? Not 0, but 1. Because we could multiply, right? The number before is what we're multiplying, and we could multiply any number by 1. So that's one thing to remember. Another thing that you got to remember is, if you look at the problems that we're doing here, you got to make sure that they are in order, right? Like for 4, you got to make sure that it goes x squared, x, constant, like how it is here, x squared, x, constant. x squared x constant, right? You might have to move everything to one side or rearrange the order. So let's see how this works in practice. All right, so we have our equation. Right? For number 1, we have x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. And here's a quadratic equation, right? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And what I like to do is, if I'm working on these problems, I like to encourage students just to write the equation on the top of your page, right? And make it big and bold so that way you could always look back on it. So that way you only have to write it out one time. Because now we just got to figure out what is A, B, and C, and we're just going to replace the values here. So we have remember, if there's no number, right, before the x squared, then our A value is going to be 1, right, because there's no number here. This is going to be negative, right, there's no number, so it's going to be negative what? Negative 1, right? The last number is negative 2. So now we're just going to, right, change this equation to this equation where we replace the A, B, and C with 1, negative 1, and negative 2. So we have x equals the opposite of negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2 all over 2 times 1. So things to remember about the quadratic equation is that the only two numbers in it are this 4 and the 2. They're always there. That's why they're not in parentheses. And just if you're substituting in, it's always good to put it in parentheses, right? Because you have this opposite of a number here. So, right, you're going to have, sometimes you might have double negatives. So it's good to put it in parentheses, right? You got to put this number in parentheses because you got to make sure that you want to say it's negative 1 squared, not negative 1 squared. Right, we want to say that it's negative 1 times negative 1. Also here, right, it's good to put them in parentheses so you could count the negatives to think about what is this sign going to be. So, moving on, right, the opposite of negative 1 is positive 1, right, plus or minus. Right, negative 1 times negative 1 is 1, 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, and 2 times 1 is 2. So now we're just going to change this 1 minus negative 8, right? The opposite of a negative is positive. So now it's going to be the sum of 1 and positive 8. So we have, right, 1 plus or minus 1 plus 8 over 2. And now in order to find the square root, we got to condense the inside down to a single number, right, first. So what is 1 plus 8? Well, 1 plus 8 is 9. So we have 1 plus the square root of 9 over 2. And then now we can figure out what the square root is. And the square root of 9 is 3. So we have 1 plus or minus 3 over 2. So now you might be kind of confused as to what does this plus or minus mean. We've worked a little bit with plus or minus when we were doing absolute value problems. But, right, what we're going to do here is we're going to break it up into two problems. We're going to say 1 plus 3 over 2 or 1 minus 3 over 2. Right, two problems. X equals 1 plus 3 over 2 or x equals 1 minus 3 over 2. Well, 1 plus 3 is 4 and 1 minus 3 is negative 2. So we have x equals 4 halves, or x equals negative 2 halves, right? 4 halves is the same thing as 2, and negative 2 halves is the same thing as negative 1. So this is our, right, problem 1. So now we're going to move on to the next problem. So we're going to skip 2. Right, you could do 2 the same way how we did this problem. The only difference is that this -2 is going to be a -3. And we're going to and then I'm going to skip 3 for you guys to do as well. And I'm going to move on to problem 4. So leave some space on your paper for problems 2 and 3. We're doing problems 4. Right, so a couple things going on. First, we got to get everything to one side. So, right, because we need it to equal 0. So we're going to say minus 4x and minus 4x, so that way this side equals 0. And we'll put the minus 4x just in between these two numbers. Right, so we get -2 minus 4x minus 2x squared equals 0. So now we just got to get it, right? It's not, we need, in order to get it in A, B, C order, let's replace the -2x squared and the -2. So right now it's x squared, x constant, right? So it'll be A, B, C. -2 is A, -4 is B, and -2 is C. So now when we plug it in here, we have x equals the opposite of -4 plus or minus -4 squared minus 4, right? Instead of AC, we'll say -2 times -2, right? Instead of 2a, we have 2 times -2. So whittling this down, the opposite of -4 is, right, +4. -4 times -4 is 16. And we have 4 times -2 is -8. And -8 times -2 is 16. Right, 2 times -2 is -4. So now let's simplify what's inside the square root so we could find the square root. Right, so we have x equals 4 plus or minus, right, the square root of 16 minus 16 is 0. So, and the square root of 0 is just 0. So now we have it down into our point where we could break it up into 2 problems. So this is a special case when we get 0 inside the square root, because, right, 4 plus 0 is the same thing as 4 minus 0, right? Once we break it up into 2 problems, we get x equals 4 plus 0 over -4, or x equals 4 minus 0 over -4, right? But 4 plus 0 is 4, right? And 4 minus 0 is 4, right? So we have the same thing here, 4 over -4 or 4 over -4. And if you're going to get the same thing, there's no point of having 2 answers, right? So we're going to just say that both times we get x equals -1, right? So we just have a single answer of x equals -1. So we'll see here that most of the time we have two answers, right? But if we get a 0 inside the square root, right, we only have one answer. And then we'll see in tomorrow's class that if we have a negative inside the square root, we have no solution, right? Because you can't find the square root of a negative number. So this part here, right, the square root part of the equation is very important, and it's called the discriminant. So we'll see that, right, sometimes based off the discriminant, right, will tell us whether we have 0, like whether we have, right, one answer, 2 answers, or no answers. So a lot of the times on tests like the SAT, they'll give you like a trick question just asking how many answers does it have, right? And then some people will go through the entire equation. But if you remember the importance of the discriminant, you could take a little shortcut and you could just figure out that part of the equation. Okay, so, and moving on, remember that you guys got to do problems 2 and problems 3, and the Khan Academy work and the video would be very helpful to do as well. And with that, you could log off.